Christmas, everybody!
Merry Christmas!
Today we're tackling more questions from members of our Facebook group. We'll cover when your deposit is at risk if you pull out of a contract. Should a mature first home buyer rentvest if they can't afford to buy where they currently live? And the pros and cons of an A versus B grade property based on affordability.
Welcome to Your First Home Buyer Guide, the podcast for first home buyers who want to move it along and become homeowners. But most importantly, it is for you to become an educated home buyer.
I'm Meighan and that was Veronica. We're both buyer's agents and probably old enough to be your mum. But it's a good thing because between us we've got over 45 years experience to share with you and bucket loads of stories about avoidable mistakes. Together, we're going to make sure you get unbiased and real information you can rely on. Allow us to guide you on your home buying journey. We want you to become an educated home buyer so that you can stop looking for your first home and actually become a proud homeowner.
We've got loads of great tips for you in this episode, and if you'd like more useful tools, head over to the website homebuyeracademy.com.au, and there you'll get access to our free mini course, How to Price a Property Like a Professional. You will also find the holy grail of home buying education, Your First Home Buyer Guide, the online course for people who want to become educated home buyers. We created this for you to help you get on the right path to home ownership for your first home and beyond.
But before we get into the interesting stuff in this week's episode, we've got the boring bit, the disclaimer. You of course know that nothing in this podcast is to be taken as personal advice. We always recommend getting the advice of an expert in their field who takes the time to understand your personal situation. We've done our very best to ensure that the content is correct at the time of recording. Things change rapidly, so always check with the relevant government authority and your trusted advisors to get the most up-to-date information.
Today we're talking about your questions. That's our Christmas gift to you. We're answering your questions. And I must say that we get some really interesting questions from our Facebook group members, and they really do show thinking about, the whole first home buyer process and purchase very, very deeply. We love that. But before we get into that, we both have a special house behind us this week. Well, actually, I'm not sure about your house, but I've got a gingerbread house.
I am. I'm living on the beach this Christmas.
So you got a tent as your house? Is that what happens?
I'm just getting sand between my toes and, really enjoying a week off with the family.
How lovely. Well, I wish I could say I was actually in somewhere where gingerbread houses were being made because I quite like a bit of a white Christmas, but I'm not. I'm in Sydney.
Another time.
Let's kick off with the questions.
Here's our first question from Jess. Now, remember, this is from our Facebook group. You can join our Facebook group. If you haven't, get in there and ask some questions. We also answer a lot of these questions more in depth. So if I put a conditional offer on and the conditions are not met, for example, building and pest inspection, and I decide not to go ahead with the purchase, will I lose my deposit? Depends.
It always depends. Firstly, it depends on where you're buying. So let's hit it off with the states where you can actually have a conditional contract.
Absolutely. So, certainly in Queensland, Victoria, you can make an offer on a contract that has conditions on it. That contract can be binding on both parties, so you can't be gazumped by another buyer, but you have a period of time to get your conditions satisfied in accordance with how they were written on the contract. So that might be a building and pest inspection, it might be a finance clause, it may be some sort of investigation. So there are states where you can make a contractually binding offer, so you are bound by the offer, but you can terminate the contract if you can't satisfy your conditions.
Yep. And,
certainly not in New South Wales, though.
Not in New South Wales, because in New South Wales, you can't actually put in a conditional offer. I mean, we technically, yes, we do make offers subject to certain conditions and they get written into the contract, but that's really the offer, meaning that those conditions are agreed to before you sign. So it's not quite like a contract, like a finance clause. You can't say, I'll make an offer and it's going to be binding subject to a building pest inspection or my finance approval, the valuation. The only way to do that in New South Wales, and there are other states where you can do something similar, but it's just that New South Wales doesn't even offer you the option of a conditional contract. is that you have to buy with a cooling off period, right? Now, the standard cooling off period in New South Wales is 5 working days. And if you do pull out, so if you do sign up and you do sign the contract, you do take advantage of that cooling off period, and in that period of time you uncover something that means you want to pull out of that contract, there is a cost to you. There is a penalty, and that is 0.25% of the agreed price. Now, we're sort of getting in the weeds here a little bit. In New
So that's
South
just
Wales,
the state-by-state differences.
It is. And,
yeah.
But if you do take advantage of a cooling off period in most states, so it's just that you don't need to in most states because they've got these conditional offers, right? But if you did in most states, there is a penalty that is attached to if you actually take advantage of a cooling off period. And the thing that I want to say too is that if Jess is from New South Wales, the reason she might have worded the question the way she's worded it, and this is why I want to just pull this bit out a bit, is because when you're in New South Wales, the standard deposit you pay on a contract when you sign a contract is 10%. Now, sometimes they might negotiate that to 5%, but standard is 10%. And it's different in other states, right? What is in
You don't
Queensland?
actually need a deposit in Queensland to form a
There you
contract.
go. Very
it's
different.
a show of goodwill. Certainly an agent is going to want you to put something on the line,
Yeah.
but it is legally binding without a deposit.
So because it's a 10% deposit, what actually happens is that often an agent will say, but don't worry, just give me the 0.25% upfront and then give me the 9.75%, the balance of it, after the 5-day cooling off has expired. So some people think that's the 0.25 is the deposit. It's not. It's a tiny proportion of the deposit. It's what's at risk, though, if you decide to pull out. So that's why, great question, and needs to be answered with nuance, because if just I answered it, the answer would be wrong if you're in Victoria. And if just Meighan answered it, it'd be wrong if you're in New South Wales.
Absolutely. So that's our state-by-state differences. Let's go back to the question. So if, for example, this was a Queensland offer that Jess was making and she's put in a conditional offer, so there is a condition in there that is subject to building and pest inspection, something's come up, it's a structural issue or there's termite damage to the structures, and she pulls out, if the condition has been written correctly, and conditions should be written by solicitors and contracts reviewed by solicitors before they're signed. So if the condition is written correctly and the remedy is that the deposit shall be refunded to the buyer, then you get your deposit back. But if it's not written correctly, then you could lose your deposit. So it absolutely depends on the correct writing of the condition itself. Now, in Queensland, there is majority of purchases are done on a standard REIQ contract that's been approved by the Queensland Law Society. And that building and pest inspection condition and the finance condition are actually pre-written into the contract. So the wording is effectively that if you terminate under that condition, you will receive by the due date, and time is of the essence in Queensland contract law. So if you terminate by the due date in the prescribed way, which is usually in writing, then you will receive your deposit back. And there is a time frame in which you need to repeat that has to be returned to you by the agent.
The bottom line here is that we believe and we strongly recommend, doesn't matter where you're buying, you should get legal advice before you sign anything. And this is why, right?
Yes.
This is why. Don't jeopardize your deposit. All right. Question
Particularly
2.
if it's a tricky condition. Because there's lots of different conditions that you can put on a contract. The trickier they are, the more you need a solicitor to actually work out, well, what are the conditions? What is the satisfaction of that condition? What is the remedy if it can't be satisfied? And what happens to money and future claims by either a buyer or a seller if there is a termination? So, yeah, really important to have a lawyer draft that. It's not as simple as if I'm unhappy, I get my money back.
Yeah, not quite. Not that simple. Nothing's that simple. Okay, question 2 is from Una. As a 59-year-old woman embarking on the first home purchase journey, and fantastic, good on you, because we actually do have a couple, a number actually of, we'll say, mature women. I don't know if we've got any mature men in the group. Put your hand up, let us know if you are, but mature women who are embarking on this journey. So I'm wondering if it would be more sensible to buy an investment property and Rentvest, as I'm struggling to find a nice place to live in Sydney.
Oh, God. so expensive.
I know it
And,
is.
you know, on a single income, it's a pricey thing. And with a shorter runway, you know, I can completely understand so much caution and so much consideration needs to be given
Mm.
at where every cent is spent, well, regardless of how old you are, actually, or how long your runway is. But really, the answer to this one kind of boils down to what's most important to you. You know, is it
Yep.
living in your own home or living in an area where you love? And that's a compromise that only you can work out.
That's exactly right. And I think that it's really important not to get sort of pulled in the directions of what other people say you should do.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that this is really key here. There'd be nothing more miserable than if you made a compromise, which meant living somewhere that you don't want to live, and you get there and you haven't even bought an investment grade property in the process because you just compromise, and none of it's good. You know, it didn't suit your requirements and it didn't suit those of being an investment either. And so that's why really asking that question ahead of time is really good to be thinking through this stuff.
Yeah.
And to give yourself permission to really be honest about where you want to live and what you want to live in as well. You know.
Yeah. We did a virtual road trip episode, Veronica. Do you remember that one? That was a lot of fun.
Yep, it was.
And that was really about going on a virtual road trip. I think it was sort of COVID-ish kind of, you know, it wasn't as easy to get around, but it was actually for a family who really didn't have ties to the area that they were currently renting in. So they threw everything open and said, look, we're in Canberra at the moment, but we could live in Melbourne, we could live in regional Victoria, we could live in regional Perth. It doesn't actually matter. So we went, all right, well, let's put this together for you. And it really talked about the sorts of things to think about if you're looking at other locations. So check that one out. But if you've got established networks in Sydney and you love where you live and your life is there, then you might be incredibly miserable if you moved away from all of that. And in that case, Rentvesting might be the best option.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot of people live in Sydney, but they don't actually like Sydney. You know, they find it too crowded, too busy, too whatever. And so, you know, if that is the case, now is the time to start exploring where else you might like to live. And so that virtual road trip is a great starting point. And that's episode 135 if you want to go and check it out. And if Rentvesting is the best option for you, then we literally recorded one, episode 205, was it 206? Only a few weeks back anyway, which is something to really listen to, but also episode 173 where we talk about the pros and cons of both options.
205 it was, and that was good actually. I really enjoyed that discussion.
It was a really good episode.
It was a good episode. I quite enjoyed it. And now I am on the wrong screen, Veronica.
That's all right.
Here we go. Question 3 from Amy. Is it worth paying more for an A-grade property when the monthly repayments will be higher and harder to manage?
Now, it's a really good question because this is about short-term pressures but long-term view, you know, and short-term you might go, you know what, I don't want to live with baked beans on toast and I actually don't want to live under the pressure of, you know, high mortgage payments and high interest rates and all the rest of it. And we never recommend putting yourself under financial pressure. We recommend buying the best possible asset that you can afford. But sometimes, because especially if you've never had a mortgage before, the whole concept of a mortgage just seems overwhelming and too much. Whereas once you're in it, it might be a lot more manageable than you had imagined. So I think that that's something to be very mindful of, that we don't want you putting yourself under pressure so you absolutely have no buffers, you just don't have any fun in life, you just feel like you're working for nothing. There's no joy in that. But how long will it feel tough for? You know, how long before you've got some pay increases? How long before you sort of get used to it and you think, you know, actually we're fine, you know. So it comes down, I guess, to your own risk appetite or your own sort of your own stress levels, I guess, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. And also, you know, sometimes the compromises that you need to make could be that it's not necessarily the unchangeable aspects of a property. It might be the parts of the property that you think you don't like but could be changed over time if you have some money down the track. That doesn't make it a B grade asset.
Mm.
If all the other aspects, around location and orientation and natural airflow and ventilation and transport and all of those other aspects that come into assessing A, B and C grade properties. And we did talk about this in episode 40, so go back and check that one out. If those sorts of things are good, the layout's functional, but you just don't like the kitchen, or you don't like the floor, or you don't like the colour of the curtains, or it needs a fresh coat of paint, these aren't compromises on quality of property. They're compromises on personal preferences that can be changed. You might have to live with them for a while until you can save the money to fix them, but they're good compromises to make if that gets you into a better location or a better quality property.
Yeah. So it's about it's about really getting into what does make an A grade versus a B grade. But I think if you can afford an A grade asset, it is always better in the long run, as the capital growth on an A grade property is very likely to outperform over time that of a B grade in the same location. So if you find yourself looking at something on a main road, for example, versus on a nice street, and you're thinking, oh, look, the main road feels safer because it feels more affordable and I won't have to spend as much money and the mortgage is not going to be as much, and yet the other one is still affordable for you, it's just going to feel a bit tighter for a few years, then, I encourage you to sort of step back from that and think, okay, long term, how much better off are we going to be when that immediate pressure of the mortgage repayments has gone? So it is really important, and it's a good question. And I think that it really lies in the answer is how seriously is that pressure going to be on the repayments? How permanent is that pressure? As opposed to will it ease and shift in a relatively short period of time? And for some people, it will.
Yeah, absolutely. Question 4 from Josh. I'm considering purchasing a property. It is possibly a B grade property because of a main road and a small apartment block next door. It's a small 2-bedroom Queenslander cottage that we would plan to raise and renovate at some point in time. So for those that you don't know, our little cottages up here, you stick a couple of
them on stilts.
Yeah, they're up on stilts. You lift them up and you put another level underneath them. It's how you extend and get double the floor plate reasonably economically.
Well, when you say reasonably economically, I mean, before we answered Josh's question, of course, Meighan did that. It wasn't on a main road and it wasn't next to a block of apartments, but she actually, if you go back, oh God, how long have you been in your house now?
Well, I moved in July last year.
July 23. So
yeah.
If we go back to episodes in
early 2023, maybe have a look there.
Yeah, late 22, early 23. You're going to see in the video, you'll see Meighan shares little progress shots of her houses being jacked up. So anyway, we digress. So you're very familiar with this concept, aren't you?
Buying a property renovate might seem like a great way to get into the market, and it is. But if you're buying on a main road, there's a higher risk that you might actually overcapitalize, and that's where you spend more money on the renovation than the property ends up being worth. So you're sitting in almost a negative position there if you've spent too much on the renovation and it hasn't added at least that much to the value of the property.
Yeah, and this is the thing, that it doesn't cost less to renovate a house that's in a B grade location. Like the cost is the same as if it is an A grade street. So I'd be looking at, is in the next suburb, can I get on an A grade street? Or actually, is there something that, can I wait a bit longer to renovate and be in a better street? Or, I mean, are there other ways that you can avoid the block of units next door, depending on how big it is less of an issue for me. And as I said, depending on how big it is and how many windows all stare into your backyard, because that's a big issue. But, it could be a small, 2-story or 3-story walk up if that's the case, and if there's trees in between. Sometimes it's not a major issue, you can live with it, but the main road, I don't love.
Yeah, look, I'd certainly caution against it. Sounds like you're in Queensland, so I would say to you, your biggest risk is that you spend a lot of money creating something that either somebody else doesn't want because they can afford to pay that money somewhere else in a better location. And therefore the value of your property doesn't rise at the same rate as other properties would have risen. And you've spent money on something that is difficult to sell.
Yeah.
So remember that Home Buyer Academy principle, which is if it's easy to buy, it's going to be hard to sell. Easy to buy, hard to sell. So main roads in any other market except an extremely strong seller's market where there's limited stock and heaps of buyers, in any other market, those properties are really hard to sell.
Yeah. And also if you do renovate them, often people think, oh, I don't want to pay that sort of money to be in that location, so that you can sort of double whammy yourself in some ways. But, go back and listen to our podcast episode 194 where we discuss the top 6 things to look for when you're thinking about renovating a property, because we've got to be thinking about what really adds value and what doesn't, how to spot those hidden costs and which projects are best left untouched. And I sort of would rather our listeners not renovate properties in poor locations and leave that for the people that aren't listening to this podcast.
It's similar with flood affected. Just don't.
Another one.
All right. Well, happy Christmas, everybody. Have you joined our Facebook group yet? It's called Your First Home Buyer Guide Australia, and it's your opportunity to connect with us and ask us your questions. You'll get answers from us, although they're sometimes posted by Jules, who's part of our team, but the answers are from us. And that means you can be sure you're not getting led down the garden path.
Absolutely. Now, a quick note, you might think that we cover everything you need to know in these podcasts. Now, you should know by now that we don't. It's not possible. There's a lot to know, and it's a very structured way in which you need to learn the things you need to know before buying a property. If you really want to be an educated first home buyer, you need to learn all of these steps and how to do everything in the right order.
Our First Home Buyer Guide course only costs $990, and you get direct access to us to help guide you through your negotiations.
And the Christmas holidays is a perfect time for you to be doing that just quietly.
It's such a good time to learn. You can be on the beach or, wherever you want to be. You can be skiing in Japan if you want to, but you probably should be saving that money. And you can just tap in, watch it, listen to it, read it, whichever way you want to consume the content, you can choose. Now, for $990, you get direct access to us every week on a Wednesday, except Christmas Day and New Year's Day.
We won't be around.
We have Campfire, and that is where people bring properties to us. They can put a link in the chat. We'll talk through the pros and cons. We'll help you work out whether it's A, B or C grade or an absolute no-go zone. And we had one of those today, actually. Well, not today because today's Christmas Day, but the day that we recorded this.
The last time we recorded this on a Wednesday.
Trust me, you'll buy better with our guidance, and you'll pay a lot more than $1,000 if you don't know what you're doing.
And we hope you're having a wonderful Christmas and not too many bickering fights in your family, because that's what happens at Christmas. Usually the time you're listening to this is the afternoon. Everyone's had a few too many sherbets. So go and have a nice snooze. Download our Your First Home Buyer Guide. Start learning how to buy a home. Happy Christmas, peeps.
Happy Christmas.
In this episode, we've only touched on a tiny part of the huge amount of things you need to know to become an educated first home buyer. There is so much more for you to do. You can learn all of the steps in the right order and avoid all of the mistakes that others have made in our 10-step online course for first home buyers.
If you'd like to learn more about the right process and avoid making rookie errors, become an educated home buyer. Head over to the website, check out Your First Home Buyer Guide, the course that we have created for you. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so you won't miss an episode. And if you've liked what you've heard today, please give us an iTunes review. It helps other people find us. And of course, I know it's a bit cringy, but we're going to ask for 5 stars. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. We hope you found this really useful. And if you have, please share the love with others who you know are in the same boat. We'll be back next week with more priceless stuff.